but I'm really clear about, like, I'm going to be who I am, throughout this entire process, and this is who you're going to get when you're here. Is the person you're representing now who I'm going to get when you're here, right? Like, everyone's going to have good days, everyone's going to have bad days. Are you going to be ready to go when I'm pushing you? What's beyond the limit that you're aware of?
Before we get started, any questions for me?
Oh, I think I'm all set.
Cool. All right. Well, I might as well just jump in. And like I said before, so we're already recording, and we'll just hop in here. So for everyone listening, I have Asiya Mahmud, who is the head coach for the University of Delaware women's rowing program. I'm very excited to talk to her. We crossed paths back in the day when she was up in Philadelphia as a coach for Drexel University, and then I'm really excited to talk to Asiya because I've heard a lot of really good things about Delaware, its program, and also just it's a program that is not too far from Philadelphia, kind of the hotbed of rowing, and a school that I know a lot of high school athletes are very, very interested in. But more so with Asiya, I'm going to let her kick off her introduction and jump into it because she can tell it better than I can. But I'm very curious with her as she enters her first spring season as the head coach for Delaware, just a little bit about building the program, the culture that they're trying to create, finding their athletes as they continue to or begin to go down this journey. So Asiya, without further ado, why don't you kick things off? Tell us a little bit about your introduction, or just who you are, how you got into coaching, and actually, before we even get to that point, give us a little bit of a status on, okay, it's mid-March. I know you're coming off of, the official kickoff to racing season. And I feel like that's a good place to start, where it's like, where are we in the season? What's coming up ahead? And then we'll branch that off into a little bit about your background and how you got into coaching.
Sounds good. Yeah, so thanks again for having me, Kevin. We just finished our first regatta in Philadelphia against St. Joe's. That was, I think something that everyone was really excited about, and something I think as a coach and as a coaching staff, it's exciting to get 6 boats down the course, right? Especially early March. You never know if you're going to have it or not, especially with the weather we've been having. But it was really exciting to get the team to Philadelphia, and you spend all winter training, but there's nothing like racing, right? Like you know who shows up when you're on the start line. So it was great to get them moving there. We have 2 weeks off until our next race. So this week, next week, actually, and then the week that follows is our spring break leading into our next regatta, which is the Doc Cosi regatta.
Gotcha. So you guys just kicked things off, first race this season, and then it's kind of like, and did you guys do any winter training trips or anything like that over the course of how did winter training go? And now, like you said, keeping a roster healthy, I think, is one of the biggest challenges this time of year. And I'm actually hearing it from a lot of high school kids that I work with, where it's like, oh, half our team is sick, and they don't even know that it's still present at the college level. Even when I was at St. Joe's, like February, March, it's a battle just to kind of, keep the full energy, keep the full lineup intact. But did you guys do any winter training trips or anything like that throughout the winter season? Describe a little bit about coming here off of a winter training season.
Yeah, I think that being at UD is new to me, and there's some unique pieces to being at UD. One of those is like their January session, right? So for the month of January, taking classes is not mandatory, right? But you can do this winter session to get ahead on your credits for your spring semester coming up. So we had a good mix of student athletes that weren't in class at all, and some that were for the month of January. And it was really awesome to have, those multiple sessions per day, and really get into the nitty gritty of not just, the rowing, not just the time in the weight room, but the culture piece, our goals as we move out of winter and into spring, and really kind of cement what our focus is. So I think we spent most of that really healthy, which was exciting. And like you're saying, like getting into this spring, trying to make sure we continue to build upon that and all of the meters that we have put in, because it was just really exciting to see them be excited about their own speed and where they've been in the past, because I think the development is critical in winter, right? Like you really start to see certain people kind of step forward, certain people kind of dial in a little more. So it's exciting to see that transition from the erg to the water. We didn't do a training trip for that. I think just feeling like we're kind of at a camp on campus. There was nothing else to do. A lot of the students that did take classes, they were asynchronous anyway. So we really did have an in-depth month of training before we got into the spring semester, February.
And so for you guys, is it and I want to dive into a little bit about you and how you got into coaching, a little bit about your background as well. Just with, obviously you've been coaching for a long time now, which is, with multiple different programs, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But for you, like, do you feel over the course of, right, you started in August of 2023, correct? Right? Like so you started,
Yes.
you're entering your first spring season.
Mhm.
What has it been like kind of, okay, coming from, Drexel and Philadelphia, and then prior to that, I think you were at Bucknell, correct?
Mhm.
And so new season starting in August and, kind of entering your spring season, do you feel like you have like a grip of, the campus feel, your athletes, and, kind of you started to kind of really get a culture going and get some momentum going here entering the spring season as you now enter a 2-week break before your next phase of racing?
Some ways yes, in some ways no, right? Like I think you can spend 8 years somewhere and feel like really sure about yourself and really sure of what you're doing. But I think as a coach, the one thing that's constant is you can be coaching at the same place, you're never going to get the same team. Right. So every year I was always starting over with a new team because personnel changes. So for in that aspect, there was nothing different about this year. Right. New team, new people, just new place. And I think that is really, I think that's something that I do well with, right? And I think like that culture piece is something that I really enjoy working on and assessing. And that's what we spent the fall doing. So really assessing, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, um, gave us the opportunity to kind of get to know each other a little better and get into, this spring season, with a little bit more sureness than for sure what I had in August. But yeah, I think like even when I coached high school, like it doesn't change, right? Like I think there's some uncertainty of what you're doing, or when I'm working with the national team in the summer, like there's some uncertainty in what you're doing. Like the goal's the goal, right? And like have that overarching goal, for what you're trying to do with the program, and build from there.
Gotcha. And circling back to you, so obviously I kind of laid it out a little bit, right? So graduated from Drexel, started coaching at Bucknell, and then obviously went to Drexel, your alma mater, stayed there. There might have been some stuff in between, but talk a little
Yeah,
bit
so
about how you got into coaching.
sure. So when I graduated Drexel, I think like athletically, like my senior year was my best year. Like personally, team culture, everything was kind of hitting on all cylinders. And I knew then that I was disappointed that I couldn't keep going. Right. I think that continuing to train wasn't my plan. Um, but how to continue with the sport was just definitely something on my mind. So I ended up actually coaching at my former high school for 2 years first, Oakhurst High School in South Jersey. And I got hooked, right? Like it starts with like, hey, help out one day a week turns to every day and race days. And I think the piece that kind of pulled me in, which is, I know part of what we're talking about today is like that recruiting piece, and that access to higher education. And I felt that the women still didn't have an understanding of how to take that next step with the vehicle of athletics. And that was, I guess, frustrating, right? I think that it's very easy in a sport like football, or now it's becoming easier in more mainstream sports. But in rowing, I think that it can be, depending on the size of your roster, your program is the resources and the access and the information that you get, right? So I was determined to help those women get recruited if they wanted to get recruited, and go to college if they wanted to go to college, right? Like it doesn't have to be the same conversation. How did I get them to their next step? And I felt like I did that with like really, really great success, seeing them move forward from their careers as high schoolers. And the whole time I was thinking, I'd be better off being on the other side, right? Like there's more programs like this that need the help, that need the access, that need the information. So I really, something that still rings true to me to this day, like over 10 years later, is I'm not just a recruiter, I'm a resource, right? Like there's a program for every person, right? It might not be my program, but I want you to have a good touch point along the way to make sure that you found out all the information that you needed.
Gotcha. And so then you're now, okay, so you're in coaching, you're officially kind of locked in, you got the bug, and then obviously kind of traveling up, with the different programs that you were a part of. And for you, I have a couple athletes who have, expressed like just they love Delaware, right? They've done campus tours and stuff like that. And from what I hear, it sounds like you guys have some pretty, great facilities. And I've never been. Maybe I'll ask you for a launch, to come out on the launch one day down the line here. I'd love to come check it out. But just the facilities themselves. And I know this. I know the school. I know I've been to the campus. I think I had a cousin who played football for the team. Back in the day. So I know that they probably are heavily invested, or they really support athletics. And with the few athletes that I've talked to, it sounds like, yeah, it seems like a really great program that you guys are continuing to build, and just a well supported one. So as you get into this season, I'm curious with you, and as a person who's been coaching for over a decade now, it sounds like, is there some principles and some different things that your team at Delaware, your coaches, your staff, is there some different things that as you guys kind of set the tone with this new journey as a new coach for this university, is there some stuff that you kind of instill in your athletes, some stuff that you believe kind of that your staff kind of rallies behind, your athletes kind of rally behind, especially as you enter this first true spring season? Describe maybe something within you personally as a coach with a decade's worth of experience, like some things that you've kind of tried to, lead with your team.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that no matter where you are, right, like you're trying to build and develop. And I've never referred to any team or any year I've worked with a team as a rebuilding year. Like we are always building forward. We are not resetting. There is no replacement for the work that you've done. Right. So just continuing to build with the athletes that we have here toward the future of the program. And with that, it's just learning together. Right. We want to develop and build and learn together. I consider myself a student of the sport. I want to coach students of the sport. I want them to be curious about, how to get faster, what about their boat, what about their technique, what about their stroke, what about their prescribed splits on the erg is going to get them to where they want to be. Because we all share that same curiosity of like, how do we get better? It's going to come out on race day. Right. And so I think that that's something that's definitely rang true in these last few months here. And then something that we talk about pretty regularly is, as we're building our culture forward, it's about results and relationships, right? Those things go hand in hand. You can't have one kind of outweighing the other. And at least at our program, that's what's going to move us forward. We have, like you mentioned, we have the resources. We have, the talent. I think it's just making sure that we keep those things on the same playing field. We value the results the same way. We value the relationships in the room. And that's what's going to get us to be a faster team.
Gotcha. And circling back around, so you said something when you were coaching with high school, or at your high school, right, where you were an athlete,
Yeah.
and you said that you really saw, being on the other side of the table, right, now being the recruiter, now being the coach, and
Hmm.
now kind of talking about the, in my mind, like some of the really, really fun stuff to kind of think about, where it's like just recruiting and athletes and athlete development really as they continue down this journey. And for, with this podcast, with this show, I always try to put myself in the shoes of the athletes that I work with individually, who eventually maybe someday will be, competing for a Division 1 or Division 3 or Division 2, whatever it may be, club program, whatever it may be. And I think for you, or my question for you, with your high school coaching background and then bridging that gap and going into a college rowing or college coaching background, are there some things that you identified in high school athletes that you felt like, and whether this is pertaining to now, what, as you're recruiting for Delaware and your program, but even just more in rowing as a whole, are there some things that you saw in those high school athletes back when you were coaching them and then transitioning into college coaching? Are there some things that you saw that maybe set athletes apart from each other or set them up for success, or was whether it was a fitness thing, academics, obviously, or just structure, routine, whatever it may be? What guided you to the other side of the table? And with these athletes, what did you identify that you could help them with?
I think that it's definitely easier now with like the way social media has taken off. But the same way like a program has to, like a student athlete has to build their brand, right? Like they have to build themselves and like they have to represent themselves as like a brand that they would want to buy into, right? Because that's what you're trying to do to these college coaches, right? And I think what I saw was like they didn't believe in their brand, right? Like you don't have the big tag name school, you don't have the big club name, like you're just the fast girl at your program, right? And that's just simply not the case. Like there's one of those at every program. And, like how are you going to sell yourself? How are you going to market yourself within, our sport? And so just really having that confidence to build yourself and build your network and not being afraid to hear no when you reach out to a coach, right? Like that confidence piece is so critical because you have to believe in yourself before this coach is going to believe in you. And I think that was the biggest piece, right? And that shows up not just in recruiting, but it shows up on race day, it shows up in an interview someday, and it just shows up in life. So building that piece, that confidence piece, and knowing who you are is going to be really important to that recruiting process.
I love that. I love the idea of building a brand, and I think you talked about it perfectly in the sense that, like, again, there's what you put on paper, there's the erg scores that you give out, there's your different tangible metrics, height, weight, erg scores, all this different stuff. But then
Mhm.
there's that whole other piece of intangible qualities of who you are as a person, your ability to market yourself, or even just send an email and communicate with coaches in a way that
Yeah,
kind of best shows who you are as a person. And
yeah.
I'm curious for you, like, what would be those steps, like when you think of branding, or just marketing yourself, and what would be those steps for some of those athletes in terms of how they market themselves? Is it, hey, sending an email? Is it setting up an Instagram account? Is it, that highlights some of their rowing highlights? Is it, whatever it may be? But what would be some of those steps in today's, obviously that was 10 years ago, right? And social media is probably, is a completely different thing even now. And yeah, what would be some of those first steps that you would advise high school athletes at any level to do if college rowing is something that they're interested in pursuing?
Yeah, I think they have to do something that's true to them for sure, right? Like everyone's not going to be on Instagram, making sure that they've got videos uploaded or making sure that they've got something about like their most recent PR. Like that's not for everyone. But I think that, like you have to do what is authentic to you because if you try to be someone on, the day you meet the coach and like that's not who you are, it's going to be really hard to keep up that front, right? So being genuine, and just knowing that the ball is also in their court. I think a lot of times we hear like, oh, like I want to like we want to find like the right fit, right? I personally don't want to be anywhere that I fit in, and I don't want my recruits to be there. I want them to add. I don't want to be where we are right now. I want to move forward, right? So like, do you add to the place that you're looking at? Do you make that place better, right? And I think that that's a really important part of the decision making process. And also, when you look at these schools, what is attracting you to those schools? Like that, like I said, like they have a brand. What is it that's making them stand out? And do you have those same characteristics, right? Because if those are the reasons it stands out to you, then you're going to probably want to stand out with it, right? So just making sure that it's, whether it stands out that it's in a city and like city's not your vibe, or it stands out like that they have a lot of resources and that overwhelms you, like you've got to know those things, right? Because if you end up there for 4 years, the impact is a lot bigger than 4 years, right? I always say to recruits, like it's not a 4 year decision, it's a 40 year decision, and the network that you're going to build and the people you're going to meet and the coaches you're going to be coached by are going to have a really long impact. So like make sure that you understand what's happening and who you're selling yourself to be, upon all of those interactions, so that you can get the best experience.
I talk a lot about expectations for a recruit, right? Like, so it's like, like what are some like, or the expectations that are asked of someone who is a Division I athlete, especially at a school like yours where you guys are very competitive. Like it's a very competitive environment, and for at any Division I level, right? Like, you're trying to row, and position yourself to hopefully, you know, medal at conferences, win races, whatever it may be, right? So, for an athlete, having that expectation, I think, is very important. Like, where it's like, understand what you're getting yourself in for, understand what, it's not just about, hey, I'm going to reach out to Delaware, this school, and have a great time being a part of it. Like, it's like, try to add value. Like, you want to be a contributor. You want to be a 4 year contributor. You don't want to just get recruited and, it's a 1 year thing. And then, now you're enjoying, your next 3 years, but rowing isn't a part of your life. Like, there's a reason why we all get into rowing. And hopefully it's not just to get recruited, it's to go to a school and add value.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not just like, I think that there's a lot of anxiety and stress around like the commitment, right? Like, and for the wrong reasons. It's not just, getting wearing that hat, wearing that t-shirt, signing on the dotted line for a photo, right? A commitment, right? Like, do we understand what that means to be committed to something, right? So to be committed for those 4 years, to be committed to the process, to be committed to the process afterwards, right? Like understanding what it means, having your own identity and being a student athlete, and what it means to change that as you graduate, right? Like all of that is part of the commitment, and it's something you have to think about and make sure that you're on board for completely.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like again, I loved how you said it's not a 4 year commitment, it's a 40 year commitment, because rowing is something that, you want to be, again, how it sets you up individually, but also the organization that's bigger than yourself. Like, and, that's going to be something that you're going to continue to be a part of for the rest of, hopefully, your life, right? Like, you're going to continue to
Yeah,
come back and watch those races. And it's a little bit different when you kind of go and it's a different experience when you go for only 1 year and you don't, you made the wrong choice because you maybe didn't do your research, or you felt you wanted something, but really that's not what you truly wanted. And
for sure.
for you, as you're sitting on the sitting across from the table, or just, I guess in today's world, right, in the Zooms and, phone calls, right? Like, with these conversations that you're having with athletes, how do you, like what you just said, where like it's like, again, that expectation, or being a value add, to a team. What is that conversation like with these recruits? Like, how do you kind of, demonstrate, like, hey, like we want you, but we also want an athlete who wants to come in and add value to our team, and be someone who wants to be in that first eight or that second eight, and work their way up, and show up every day and put their best foot forward. How do you articulate that message? How do you kind of sell what you're looking for or to an athlete?
At practice, I think it's easy, right? I think it's like, where do you see yourself in this room? Where do you see yourself in this lineups? Who moves the way you move? Who has the energy you have, right? And hopefully they're the leaders within the room already, right? And it kind of starts to tell them a little bit about themselves. But I'm really clear about, like, I'm going to be who I am, throughout this entire process, and this is who you're going to get when you're here. Is the person you're representing now who I'm going to get when you're here, right? Like everyone's going to have good days, everyone's going to have bad days. Are you going to be ready to go when I'm pushing you? What's beyond the limit that you're aware of, right? Like, are you able to, um, do you want to learn and do you want to grow? Like I said, like that piece of being that student of the sport is something that comes up in those initial conversations, right? And what do they love about rowing? Like, I hope it's, race day, but I hope it's so much more than race day, because they're going to get a lot more out of it if they have that investment past what the answer is that they think I want to hear, right? Like, of course, I want to hear that you're shooting for the varsity, but I also want to hear that, you want to be a leader on this team, right? And I also want to hear that you understand that everyone on this team is a leader, and making sure that, everyone, you have to understand the vision, and you have to understand the expectations pretty early on, because when you hit the ground running with 50 other women who have already done it, you want to make sure that you're on board so that you don't get left behind.
And as you start kind of, and you again, you're starting your spring season, but you have your staff, you're kind of probably starting to think about, or you're probably deep into thinking about next fall with from a recruiting standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And just in general, like where again, as starting in August 2023 and probably hitting the ground running, trying to create a class that's going to come in fall of 2024 and beyond that, even, right? Even beyond that. But where, two parts to this question, but where did you and your staff turn to first in terms of finding athletes, identifying athletes that are, maybe going to be, appropriate fit for Delaware? Like, where did that journey begin for you as a team? And then also, what are some of the things that you were looking for in those initial stages? Was it purely, hey, I'm going to go, I have a coach who's screening questionnaires and, oh, these athletes, this and that? Is it purely athletes that have reached out to us? Give a little understanding for athletes at home who are trying to start this process.
Sure. Yeah, I think that Delaware is a big school, so we definitely do that walk-on piece in the fall, and get a good amount of, student interest there. But when I got here, I turned to the team, right? Like, who did you row with that you would run a row with again? Who made you motivated and who pushed you, right? And are they still in high school? And can, and then finding out from there. And I think that there's a great deal of our athletes that like respected people that they used to row with, right? And then kind of making sure that we've got connections with those programs. Definitely have my connections from Philadelphia, and connecting with coaches there was pretty easy. But reaching outside of what I would say like my normal pool was, and making sure that the athletes um, understand what's available, because I grew up in New Jersey. I lived in Philadelphia. I didn't know what was here, right? Because I think it's really easy to write something off or put something on your list based on what you've heard, right? So that's why I turned to my student athletes and saw like what connections do they have and what have they been saying about their program, and are they able to get people to come here, because I think like that pipeline process for recruiting is huge, right? Like if someone's here and someone's enjoying their experience, they're going to want other people to enjoy the experience too, especially if they were great teammates, right? So that was definitely something that we relied on initially. I think that everyone that we committed for this fall, we started talking to this fall.
Gotcha. And then and that's amazing. I mean, I think that's a great, like, I have heard that and, in the past done it, to a degree, but I didn't invest fully into that where it's like, hey, like talking about your current team, like who are those people that you rode with that, again, like you said, you would want to row with again at the next level, right? And let's start there, right? Let's start with because who better to sell that vision? Who better to sell, your program, your school, even than the people who have been there for a couple years already, and are doing the day to day. So I think that's a huge piece. And from a athlete who is okay, sophomore, junior in high school, like again, high school, they're starting to, and again, coming back to that piece that you said, where it's like, hey, like I want to be an advocate for all athletes, who want to go on and row at the next level and be someone who can provide information for them. And even as it relates to Delaware specifically, but even just in general, but where would those athletes begin who maybe they don't have that connection? Maybe they are from from down south in Florida or on the West Coast or in the Midwest and up in the Northeast, and they don't have a direct tie through another athlete
Sure.
to Delaware. Where would you advise they begin? Where would you say like actually carries some weight? Is it just creating a recruiting profile and letting it sit, or is it actually doing some research and reaching out to the coaches directly? What would you say to those athletes?
I'm just the kind of person that in life, like you can this is not a test run, right? Like so if you're being passive in your experience, you may not get the experience you want. So like of course you can make the profile. You're gonna get it's part of our job as coaches to reach out when we see the profile of a student athlete that is what we're looking for. But I think that there's so much more beyond that, right? So like you have to advocate for yourself in the recruiting process. I'm looking for people to that I would not normally get here. Right. Like that is recruiting. I'm looking for people and making sure that they think that this is somewhere that they want to be. That's recruiting in a nutshell. I'm not recruiting you if, there's not a lot of actual recruiting happening when I know that this is your number one, right? Like you're already in, right? So I think that like the people that are on the outside of that conversation, making sure the easiest way is fill out the school's questionnaire. It doesn't take a lot of and even when you fill out that questionnaire, it's not a bad idea to follow it up with the email, right? We see it, but what are we learning about you other than if you allow yourself to be numbers, then you're just going to be numbers, right? So create that conversation, create that interest, because again, at the end of the day, the worst thing you can hear is no. So just put yourself out there and take the risk.
I think that's such a awesome piece of advice for athletes. Like there's so many who are just they're just very passive in the process. They're afraid that to send an email until they're ready or they're until their 2K score is this or that. And like I always like I'm a big believer where it's like, hey, like just send an email. Like what's the big deal? Whether they're either going to respond and tell you something that which is awesome, right? Like or they're going to tell you something like, hey, like maybe reach out in 3 months, or they're not going to see it, and then which is fine because they're getting a million emails anyway, and like, but if you don't just send that email and get the process started, and like I think like you said, like don't be afraid to not and also don't get too uptight or tense when they don't respond, right? If they don't respond, right, and it's like, oh, I didn't get
Yeah.
a response yet. And one of the things that I always tell athletes as well is like these coaches like yourself, like you got so many other things going on, and even your assistant coaches who may be answering a lot of the emails as well, where it's like if they don't get back to you in 24 hours or even a week or whatever, maybe like it may just slip by with the other email that they had to do about their team or compliance or this or that. Like there's so many other things
Yeah.
that kind of, so again, like just send those emails, get keep and but make them genuine, right? Make them don't just where it's like, hey coach, you get my last email kind of thing. So no, I think that's a huge
Sure.
piece of advice for athletes. And I think another piece that I want to kind of talk about is like, okay, you obviously have a lot of experience with just being in women's rowing for the last for a long time, right? For 10 years, right? So for athletes who are trying to broaden their scope of what's out there, and in terms of like just the full recruit or college rowing landscape, from I think there's 100 something or close to 100 Division 1 schools, then you have the D2, D3 and club programs, so on and so forth. Is there anything that you would say to those athletes where it's like to come across a school like Delaware just from looking at race results or something like that, where it's like, oh, I didn't know that they had a rowing program like this? Like I'm sure most do for that, but like even there's those other examples, right, of schools that maybe aren't top of the radar, right? Like, oh, I want to row at an Ivy League, and these are the only schools that are out there, and this and that. But there's other schools out there. So where would people kind of go to, or what would you tell those athletes like to kind of broaden their scope and understand the full college rowing landscape?
That's a really good question because, like you said, there are so many programs, right? And I almost feel like there should be some sort of online tool where they just like do some sort of survey about themselves, and it will pop up, But you have to do your research, right? You have to, again, if you're looking to row in college, find the school that makes sense for you, right? Because you're going to be doing the classes whether you're in shape and on board or you're injured, right? So make sure the school works and then see if they have the program, right? Because again, you might be surprised of what you find. And then I think that that's just the best way to start it off. Like you got to make sure the school fits. And then you need to make sure that see if the rowing program's there and learn more about it afterwards.
Yeah, and I think even with that, it's like, hey, like, like there are a lot of options out there where it's like, but if you don't like the school first, then
Right.
doesn't matter what the rowing's going to look like. If you don't like the school first, and you're only happy for those 3 hours that you're with your team, it's going to be a tougher road. Um,
Yeah.
and I think circling back around to you and what you're building with your program specifically in terms of just, okay, like what are some things that, again, like for the athletes that, in your boathouse currently, or not even in your boathouse currently, but like just like, I'm trying to think of kind of the best way to kind of ask this question, but even with you personally, like, what do you feel like are some of your strengths as a coach that you're trying, like, where it's like, I think you referenced it before, where maybe, whether it's leadership or, organization as a team, where I know my athletes are going to, we're going to come in and they're going to know exactly what they're doing, this and that. Like, what are some things that, through your coaching career that you've brought that you feel like are some of your strengths, that you kind of, right? Like some people are the vocal leader. Some people are the ones who, are, yeah, describe some of those for me.
Yeah, I think that what I've seen and what I've been told, and I guess what I know about myself is like I just really bring a passion for rowing, right? Like you're going to learn a lot about rowing, and it's either going to make you love rowing or it's going to make you hate rowing, right? But I think that it leads to the side of like you love the sport, right? Like you're not just invested in your own experience, you're invested all the way at the top, right? Like you're invested in the Olympians, you're invested in the every aspect of our sport is going to make you do better. So I think that I'll share articles with my team that's about men's rowing. I'll share articles about, Olympic coxswains and what they think. You just have to be well rounded in your education about the sport, right? Otherwise, you're just like living in this silo of what you think is supposed to be the experience, right? I want you to learn and want you to grow. And I think the other piece that I do really well is like culture, right? Like I'm going to call you out when you're not being a good student athlete or a teammate. I'm going to make sure that you're accountable because like the culture piece rules, right? Like the culture piece is so important, and I think that they know that I hope that they understand like I'm shaping them not just within rowing, but the full person, right? Like they really get to um, be good people, but they also get to be good athletes, right? And they get to have that full investment. And it's not that a lopsided experience. I know that um, athletes that I've coached, like they still really do love the sport, and like when you create great alumni and you create people that want to come back and you create people that want to coach and different things like that, you know that you're hitting the mark for sure. And I think like that next piece is challenging people to do more than they think they can, right? And I get excited every summer, like when I'm working with the national team. And I think like that's my next piece, like pushing not only my own team's boundaries within themselves, but pushing their scale of what they think is possible to be able to compete and to be able to um, be voted at that higher level within the sport.
And is there things that you feel, with your rowing, Division I coaching experience with multiple programs, like, is there things that you've observed that you feel like just some athletes who really see success at the college level kind of own and have that maybe others could strive for, whether again it's like just some of the athletes that you're coaching, in the past or now or whatever it may be, or with, different national teams and stuff like that. Like, are there different intangibles even, or just things that you've noticed in those athletes who kind of have really seen that success, that maybe other athletes don't have or need to kind of strive for? Again, like whether it's routine or organization or good grades, whatever it may be.
I think all those things you said are definitely part of it. But as you ask the question, I think like people who are good collaborators, right? Like people, not just the coxswains, but not just the captains. Like there's people who have good communication skills and they're great at collaborating with the coaches, and you see their success because they understand how to do the work, they understand how to make the changes, they understand the team pulse, and they're very good communicators. And that sets them apart from the rest of the team. A lot of coaches have their doors open and are available to talk to their student athletes about like plans on test day or different things, right? And it's like I've seen the most success with the student athletes that don't just talk on test day, right? That don't just talk on seat race day. They're consistently communicating, because, like I said, they're learning, right, and they're growing, and I think that's a game changer for sure.
Yeah. And circling back around to you individually again, so and a couple more questions. Be conscious of your time. With I'm sure things are busy as you get into racing season, but circling back around to you said that you were a student of the sport and you send articles to your athletes and so on and so forth. Like just in general, like where did that develop? Was that something that developed in high school, in college, when you started coaching? Where did that develop? And that innate passion for rowing that drives you as a coach, where did that develop?
Think that was like on my way out of college, right? Like I wanted to check everyone's race results. I wanted to know how, everyone was doing. I mean, maybe it started before because even when I was in high school, I would just go to a regatta and snake boat hold, right? Like I think that it definitely I just always loved being around rowing, right? And I think that that piece was always present, and whether I knew it or not. I would send my teammates things, like I think that that piece of always wanting to get better and always wanting to learn was always there, and so it's just crossed over into my coaching, and I try to inspire that same feeling in the student athletes that I work with.
I think that's a really important piece too. Like just for just in general, like athletes, like it's like there's more to rowing than just what you're gonna pull, on the erg that day or the race. Suiting up for the race and going like, and for someone like yourself who that is a driving force and why they coach, just because they are innately passionate about the sport. I think that's a really positive thing for athletes because again, like there's going to be a great there's beyond just what have you done for me today in this practice. It's more, hey, like you're a part of this community, this sport. And I think it's a powerful piece. So with that, when as you guys kind of gear up for, okay, you have this 2 week block, circling back around to Delaware, maybe we'll close out with a couple fun things with just you and your team. But circling back around to entering this spring season, what do these next 2 weeks look like for you in preparation for your next race? And what is that? You can describe what that next race is. I know you said it previously, but describe like what these next 2 weeks, as you have your baseline from, race, and then you start to kind of put together the puzzle pieces to prepare for that next race. Describe a little bit about what these next 2 weeks look like.
Yeah, I think like this week, like is a bit of a reset, right? Like coming out of a training block, so you just finish like a hard block, and then you race on top of that. So now it's an opportunity to reset. Um, and then following that, like we're gonna refocus, right? Like talk about our goals, test out our goals, and see if where our speed is right then, and then um I think it's just like refocusing, like we get an opportunity to get on the line against really fast schools, and create that kind of, I think, conference energy, right? Like when you sit on the line with five other schools that are really fast, like that puts you in the championship mindset, right? That puts you in the main mindset and creating those opportunities as we get into the bulk of our season. Because if you can start with that and get your nerves and get your emotions and get your your head right around what you're doing, I think that you set yourself up for success for the season, right? Like I don't take it for granted whenever I'm on the line. Like everyone wants to win, right? Like you're not unique when you want to win, like wanting to win is average because no one sets out wanting to lose, right? So, what are you doing to stand apart, in your training day to day? And what are you doing, with your teammates and your coaches, in order to inspire that to come out on race day?
Yeah. And are you guys fully on the water, or do you intermix? You said a little bit about testing. Do you get intermix some erging? Is there an expectation? Some athletes are going
Yeah.
to be doing some erging on their own. Like, are they? What's
Yeah.
that look like?
We've got regular cross training. So like this week, um, is not one of those weeks, but on a typical week, we will have cross training on the erg. In addition to being in the weight room, there that's something that's kind of consistent across the board. I think it's easy to lose touch with the erg in the spring season, so that's something that we do keep a pulse on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge one. I'm glad that you said it like that. Like, just with athletes, like continuing to kind of incorporate, or I'm sure you guys are always thinking about evolving, and comfort with fitness and stuff like that. So I think that's especially from a high school standpoint, like continuing to kind of think like college athlete and what they're doing. I think if that's somewhere that
Yeah.
you aspire to be. And my last question for you is, describe to me a little bit about, okay, your first spring season. I know I've said that like 7 times already, but you're in your first, you're entering your first spring season. Describe to me a little bit about your short term vision with the program, and not really just this year, right? Because like you guys have already started, right? You're already started that journey. But over the next, say, like 3 years, and then where do you feel like personally, like where I can already tell, like in our conversation, like you're competitive, you're driven, like there's something, it's like you don't want to settle for just hey, we're here to hang out and go down the course. Like, describe to me what that kind of short term or medium term vision, or, past this year, and then beyond that, where do you see yourself in this journey for you at Delaware?
I really value this year as like an education year, right? I was getting to learn about the athletes and the university. The student athletes are getting to learn about me and our training and what it looks like for the goals that we have for them. So this year's just been really education. I think the next 3 years are execution, right? Now that we've learned what we want to do, can we execute, right? Can we make the goal of, winning a conference championship a reality? And I think that that's, the execution piece. And I think, even beyond that, is a commitment, and that almost ties back to recruiting, right? Like you've established this goal. You know that you have what's necessary to reach this goal. Are you committed to the work that it takes to continue that goal or exceed it? Right. So I think that that's kind of what the future shapes up to be for us. And I'm just really excited. I think the energy is awesome every day, and I love being around the team because they want to learn, and I love being around the staff because they want to, think about how to push the team forward. And it's just a great energy to be around, and really looking forward to seeing how this season finishes up.
Awesome. And my last question for you is if you can, in like a 30-second little bit, like describe what lured you to, or what attracts you about Delaware and the school and the team, and just again, like a little summary for you, like what led you there, right? Like, what was something that
Sure.
drew you to this program, this school, this community,
Mhm.
in I guess however many months ago when you took this position.
Yeah, I think that, that community piece is big, right? And being in the state of Delaware, like it's all about the 302. Like we're all together in this and we're all focused on the same thing. The excellence or the expectation of excellence across all of athletics, right? I think it's not good enough just for one team to win. We all want to win, which is really exciting to be around and learn from other coaches as well. And I think the resources as well. It definitely feels like Power Five in a small town. So it's just really exciting to see and to know that what the students have access to here is not holding them back from from being at the top of the podium. It's just a matter of work and dedication and a commitment to what we could be.
No, I love that. I think that's a great way to close things out. And Asya, this was awesome. I think there's a lot of value in here that athletes can kind of take with them just from a just broad picture recruiting and college rowing and getting a little sense of what to expect at that next level. So this was perfect. And I was serious when I said that maybe I'll come down there if I am able to.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
I'm invited, I'd love to come down and ride the launch and learn a little bit more about the team and actually see how things are, how you guys, go through a practice and all that. So maybe
Absolutely.
we'll set that up here down the line. But any last things from you? Any last things that we can do to help you, or where athletes can go to find you and learn a little bit more about that, or find your staff? Like any last things before we wrap things up?
I think we're on bluehens.com. We've got our questionnaire, like I said, like fill it out and then take that next step, be exceptional, reach out to us. We're excited to hear about people who are excited about the future of this program because we know it's going in a really exciting direction.
Love that. No, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to close things out. Asia, again, thank you so much for coming on. Good luck as you embark down this spring season and move
Thank
closer
you.
to your goals. I'm excited to tune in and watch. But again, appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to seeing how things play out this spring.
I appreciate it and really excited to have you in the launch. We want to make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.